Okay, we're going to get started here with our harvesting energy panel. And the way I think is best to do, we're hoping that we'll get questions from you in the audience on this panel. And but I think it'll be smoother if we save those till the end. You can see everyone's name tag up here. So if you can hang on to your questions until we finish, I think that will, with our presentations, we should have about 10 or 15 minutes for questions. And I'm going to start. Let me first introduce myself. I'm John Bringenberg. I'm your moderator for this session. And I do a handful of things. One of the things that I've done is I've spent 7 years on the board of COSIA. It's now called COSA, Colorado Solar and Storage Association. 7 years on the board of COSA, and 2 years as president. And during the bulk of that time, I was involved in regulatory and policy work. I've been an expert witness on rate cases and other dockets 3 or 4 times. So I'm a kind of a policy geek when it comes to renewable energy. I also am the president of the board of an organization called New Energy Colorado, which is a kind of an education outreach arm of COSA. And for a living, I do PACE financing for one of the large national funding firms for PACE financing. That's called Petros. And fun fact, I am the lead co-author on the first book on the topic of PACE financing. And that is, actually, just one second. Yes, so I've not ever written a book before, and this came out about 2 months ago, and it was, there's a lot of contributions from industry folks, including Tracy, who you'll hear from in an hour or so, talking about finance. So we had very good industry support for this as well. Just as a sort of a backdrop or a highlight, what we're trying to do in this particular session is to, everyone at the table here is a professional in their own space, and we want to describe how you can evaluate with professionals your needs. And then Paul is actually going to talk a little bit about the importance of doing that in the front and the back and sort of in an ongoing way with your building. We're going to ask you to consider all sensible technology options, and Ben will talk a little bit about some of those. And we've already heard a little bit from Bill about things, so we're going to hear a little bit about other technology options. You'll almost certainly engage multiple contractors, get multiple bids, so you'll get to meet folks like these. You look for stretch goals, but determine what is the best fit with your congregation. And some of that is common sense, but some of it, folks like Likely Treading can help you think through those things. And then once you do things, to measure and track results as well. So those are some of the things we're going to talk about. And one of the things I wanted to do, we don't have Hulkin. We just heard from Grant from the Hulkin aerial group, but they do, this is simply an aerial photograph, but their system is also a system to help both survey the situation and then also monitor and manage things after they happen. And it's not just energy. It could also detect energy leaks or water leaks in a roof. They use infrared to detect a range of problems, and 3D modeling, very precise and accurate measurements for solar design and roof replacements and things of that nature. It's much safer than having people hanging on to the side of a 10-story building trying to figure out what's going on somewhere, or on the roof. I just wanted to explain a little bit about what Hulkin does, because they're not here. And these are our speakers today. We have Paul Kriescher, Jim Smith, Ben Valley, and Bill Braden. We're going to start with Paul. And Paul, you can use that microphone there, I think, or you want to be up here? Okay, super. And you can advance slides here. Let me just take a moment and say a few words about Paul. So Paul, whoops, wrong sheet of paper here. So I'll have to wing this. Hold on a second.
You know me well enough, Jeff. Just make it up.
Yeah, so Paul is principal at Lightly Treading, and they're an energy engineering and management firm that works on energy efficiency, safety, environmental impact, things like that. But he's also very plugged in. So he's a former board member of CRESS, adjunct professor at CSU, their Institute for Built Environment, founding member of the Energy Efficiency Business Coalition, is on some code committees with the city of Denver. And we heard earlier from Kirk of Bonnie Bray. He's one of the lay leaders in that church on sustainability. And lastly, because I don't think his presentation will hit on this, but he does a great job of posting videos, I think one per month, and he does a great job of distilling complicated things into easy to understand concepts. So it's really worth listening to his podcast. So we'll let you jump in there. There you go.
Thank you, John, so much. I'll grab that, but keep it like that. Okay. We'll do it like this. So thank you, everybody. Thank you for that introduction, John. That's fantastic. Very much appreciate it. One thing I'll touch on before I get into some of the what of what we do in buildings, because we are very much building guys. Like I said, we're building doctors, very focused on buildings. But why? Why did we do that? Similar to Joan Gregerson, as if you remember her talking earlier this morning, I've been long passionate about doing something around the environment. And when I went to school in engineering, actually, I first did political science and Eastern religions, and then did engineering after that at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. There wasn't really a targeted program that was a perfect fit for what I wanted to do, but found a pretty darn good one and got to make a little bit of my own program. But the why for it is that buildings, to me, gave the opportunity to do education, because each and every one of us spends time in buildings, right? Too much time, probably, honestly. And many of us own buildings. So it's like, if you have a chance to educate the people in buildings or get feedback, because that's what I've learned over the years, is that a lot of time we're learning from the people, like how uncomfortable they are, how unhappy they are with the utility bills. Why is this building, so hot and so cold? It's like, what is going on with this thing? We've learned a lot from that and been able to come up with solutions for them in those buildings. But the other big part is that buildings use in this country right about 40% of all of the energy that we use in this entire country. Think about transportation, think about industrial practices, think about things like that, and it's like, buildings are a huge part of it. So, with that being said, our company in recent months, really over the last year, has taken a really strong focus around helping clients look at their buildings from a regenerative process. We've had the benefit of working with about 17 or 18 churches in Colorado and one in Wyoming, actually. This term of regenerative is new enough to us that, like, on this project, we weren't using it at that time, but regenerative is a little bit of a growing buzz term, but I think it does a good job of getting at where we want to be with buildings, because it's talking about, state of being regenerated, spiritual renewal, of restoration or body, or in this case, building. So in the end, there's other great people that spoke earlier talking about needing to have love and care for what you're doing to make things different in the world. There has to be a thought process and approach to get buildings to be part of something that you love and care about, because it's what it does, making people comfortable, making them sheltered, making them feel more alert, making them feel cared for. And by the way, doing less harm to the environment, being a representative of a good steward towards God, towards creation. Regenerative is that process of getting to the point of saying, the building generates all its energy that it uses. And eventually getting to the point of takes in the water, or lots of the water that it uses. Ideally, food sources that come in, lots and lots of them come in. So it's ideal, but what's awesome is like when I was studying this stuff 20 years ago, the thought of buildings generating their own energy was like science fiction. It was still so far out there. It was like, well, yeah, that might happen before I croak. Yeah, I mean, honestly, was where I was at, but it's like, it's happened. So if people who are thought leaders, like I think many of you are, think about this in terms of regenerative buildings, you're going to get to a point of like, oh, now let's do more to bring in the water on the building. Let's do more to bring in even the food on the building. Make them a living entity instead of an object that's just a real estate asset. So with that, energy efficiency is critical to becoming regenerative. Having a plan. John did a very nice job of talking about us being people that can help with a plan at the beginning. And that's what we do by doing audits and doing computer modeling, and then through a process, doing inspections and tests to make sure improvements are done well. We bring in our contractors when people want us to, because we know quality contractors who've been at this for 22 years. We know the ones that do a good job versus the ones that don't. And then do quality assurance on the back end to be like, this thing's going to work. It's going to work beautifully. But having that plan is critical. So we do the level 2, level 3 energy audits. I won't get nerdy about that. It's just meaning we're doing blower door testing and infrared camera scanning and things like that. And we've done dozens of church buildings, but we've done thousands of buildings in Colorado, tens of thousands actually. A lot of them homes. Commercial buildings we've done about 500 or 600. So I like giving pictures because they're especially better to understand than lots of words. So part of what we find in buildings that Mark touched on from the panel just before us, and other people talked about, like, well, what do you find typically? Well, we oftentimes find, like in this property that was actually relatively newly built, lots of missing insulation in the ceiling in this case. Not a good place to be missing insulation. Well, there was actually some insulation in this one, but really poorly installed in that. We find air leakage pathways coming through wall cavities that when we're running a blower door, doing an infrared camera scan at the same time, amazing what you'll see. That is being exaggerated by our blower door, but this is happening at a slow level all the time in this property. We also find, how well, like in this case, the wall insulation is working. This property, again, had some really badly done stuff. And John did a nice job of plugging our videos. I did a video a few months ago on the fact that we need to have something called, as I call it, pay for performance for builders. Because a big part of why this comes about is because builders and developers, well, especially builders, make no money after the project's completed. So they have no financial interest to make sure that your property works well. They want to make it through the first year of the warranty and be like, have a good one. Yeah. If they were tied into the performance, like if it was meeting Energy Star on a regular basis, Water Sense on a regular basis, guaranteed no more than 3 degrees of temperature difference anywhere, it'd be amazing how better our buildings would be if they got a financial reward for doing that. So you can watch a video on that. It's a high-minded idea, but something like that needs to happen because the marketplace is blind right now. It's like, it's a real estate asset. Get rid of it. Put it on the poor sucker who bought it. That's not loving. That's not good. It doesn't lead to good buildings, and the buildings last for 100 years. So it's like, that's a bad thing. So a big part of what we do is this type of diagnostic testing, blower doors, flow hoods, doing measurements on what you got going on in your building. So the lovely woman from Citizens Climate Lobby touched on this already, but I want to touch on a few policy things to wrap up my time, just because beyond doing things with buildings, like John, we dabble in, and years ago I used to lobby actually for COPERG at the time, and then for a short time for Environment Colorado, and did some lobbying actually in Wisconsin when I was going to school there. But policy is a huge part, and again, I think of many of you as thought leaders, and you need to wear that hat a bit and say, yep, it's really important for me to act on policy things and ideally encourage friends and neighbors to do the same. But this plan actually is one that, I don't know, I tried to look up the status of it yesterday, but I didn't get an update. But it's matching with Governor Paulus's vision to do a reduction of carbon pollution over time. And it was just introduced on April 3rd, I believe. It's fairly recent. No, introduced on March 21st. The other one's April 3rd. There we go. March 21st, but I couldn't get an update on that one. So it's like, but a beautiful, clear steps towards reduction of carbon. Not saying how we're going to get there, but saying that it's going to be there. So it's a very good step. This was one that I did get an update on. I was supposed to testify on this one yesterday, but being sick, I didn't make it to that one because I was worse yesterday than I am today. But basically, they're trying to update building codes. Without getting too detailed, in our state, we have a home rule state. So each jurisdiction, like each city, each county, if there's not a city jurisdiction, can have their own building codes. Makes it really challenging for the people building homes, especially if, like, across the street, I can build really crappy when it comes to energy efficiency. On this side of the street, I have to build really good. It's strange, honestly. So they're doing things to incentivize and seek to make a minimum standard of the energy code from at least 2015 to be that minimum standard. And that passed out of committee yesterday on a party line vote in the House. Democrats, party line vote, voted for it. Likely will continue progressing, but just keep that in mind. If you want to get more on bills, or legislation, you can give me your email address, or take a look at this ledge.colorado.gov bills, and you can find out about those. And the one that Citizens Climate Lobby has been working on for more than a decade, and it's finally making some progress, is the bill that was referenced, the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act, which is basically learn more from Citizens Climate Lobby, but it's awesome. It's like saying, yes, we're going to tax the carbon when it comes out of the ground, the coal, the natural gas, the petroleum. They, of course, will pass on the price increase to us. They'll send a signal to all of us like, oh, this is not good. Energy prices are going up. What should I do to conserve more and use less? But there will be a dividend that comes back. Beautifully, the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, the Evangelical Environmental Network, and the Presbyterian Congregation have all signed statements of support for this legislation. And I was hearing that Universalist Association, or what is it called? UUCA, thank you, John. That I guess you guys have? Okay, okay. Have provided some letter of support for it as well? Okay. For some reason, the video that Citizens Climate Lobby had from just last week didn't mention that, so chat with the lady out here and get you guys credit for that. All right, so you can learn more from them. All of this stuff, if this legislation gets passed, this all makes it more for the people that aren't early adopters to say, I need to do something. I get it. It's hitting me in my pocketbook. Even if I'm not paying attention to the bigger picture side of it, that they want to do something to make the world better and for themselves. So with that, I'm done. How'd I do time-wise, John? Pretty close.
Thanks, Paul. And next, we're going to hear from Jim Smith. Jim is the owner-broker at Golden Real Estate, possibly the only real estate brokerage in Colorado with a net zero energy office. But I think what for those who know Jim, he's high profile. Those that know Jim know that this is a person who walks the talk. So we'll listen to Jim talk a little bit about some of the things that they've done, and we'll end up talking a little bit about geothermal. We were not able to get the geothermal contractor that helped us with this building was not available to us. So we're using we're plugging some stuff in here that we're going to talk about in that regard as well. Thanks. Here you go, Jim.
So my slides are here.
Yeah, just we'll go. Yeah, so it's Jim, and there you go.
Okay, great.
Yeah, it's like that.
Great, yeah. Well, it's a pleasure to be here. I had been watching the construction activity here as I would drive past, because as a realtor, of course, I'm on Hamden Boulevard, as I am on practically every major thoroughfare regularly. So I was wondering what's going on at this church, which I've spoken at before. I spoke about Habitat for Humanity here about 10 years ago. But I'm so glad and so proud of what you've all done, and I just so respect it. What I'm doing at Golden Real Estate is to show that really there's nothing special about what we did. And I'm trying to, as it says on all of our yard signs, with Golden Real Estate yard signs, unlike most brokerages, we actually have value statements on our yard sign, and one of them is that promoting and modeling environmental responsibility. And so what I try to do is to show that yes, walking the talk is really important. And so This is what we did to get to net zero. And it wasn't like it was my goal to get to net zero. My goal has always been to tread lightly. I love the name of your company, Lightly Treading. You know, we all should strive to tread lightly on this earth and leave the path better than we found it. And so, yeah, it happened. I ended up at net zero, but it wasn't like a goal. But we did the obvious things which anybody can do. We super insulated our building. We put in LED fixtures and light bulbs inside and out. We added solar, starting first with 5 kilowatts to power the office. And then as we started buying electric cars, adding 15 more kilowatts of solar power. We daylighted our office. Everybody should do that. You know, bring sunlight into the office. If you have a flat roof, I mean, it's a no-brainer. If you have a ranch-style home, of course. At home, I have sun tunnels into my laundry room and my garage because neither of them have natural light. Well, now they do. And that reduces electricity too. Tankless hot electric water heater. When I bought this building, it was a restaurant. It had a big 50-gallon or bigger gas hot water heater. I thought that's kind of stupid. Now that it's a real estate office, we just have bathrooms and a kitchen sink making coffee. So I got it. In fact, it's only 110 volt electric tankless hot water heater. Then finally, in November of 2017, I noticed that we were generating more electricity than we could use even with our electric cars. And I thought, well, wouldn't it be great if I used that excess electricity to heat the building? How do you do that? And I learned about mini splits and heat pumps and how efficient they are. And for $15,000, I had the HVAC system on the roof decommissioned. It's still there. Why bother taking it to a landfill or something? So it's still sitting up there, but also sitting up there is a compressor for our mini splits, a heat pump compressor. And I'm so happy I did that. And it didn't use the rest of the electricity that we were creating. And then of course buying and encouraging electric cars. You know, I started out with a Lexus hybrid, you know, and then I got a Chevy Volt in 2012, and that sold me on the idea of having a totally electric car. So in 2014, I got my first Tesla. Then in 2015, I got an all-wheel drive Tesla. Then in 2017, I got a SUV Tesla. So I sold the rear-wheel drive one to people in Arizona who don't need all-wheel drive, but electric cars are just an obvious thing to do, and it turns out I have enough electricity for them as well. By the way, if you know, as you may know, Excel Energy only allows you to put like 125% of your last 12 months use in solar capacity on your roof. But if you show them a purchase contract for a Tesla, they'll let you go much higher than that because your next 12 months you're going to be using more electricity, and that's what we did. That was one of the ways we got up to the 20 kilowatts was that I licensed my Tesla at our office so that I could use it to get that extra capacity. And then offering free electric vehicle charging to the public. Well, that came with the fact that you can get charging stations. Do you have any here at the church?
No, not required for them.
But the Regional Air Quality Council, I think it is, has a program where they will pay 80% of the cost of these. So I got in on that plan, and the City of Golden paid the other 20%. So I got 2 free ChargePoint charging stations for my office. The only condition was you have to provide free electricity for at least 3 years. So we did that. And so that's how we got 2 of our 4 charging stations at the office. And then, again, just because lightly treading, recycling styrofoam, I hated putting it in the trash. And I found out that people who manufacture styrofoam, of course they can melt it down and reuse the scraps. So I found out where they were, and I started collecting styrofoam, and we now keep 200 cubic yards of styrofoam out of the landfill by having a corral behind our office where we invite people to bring their white styrofoam. This is the back of our parking lot. The larger set of panels is 10 kilowatts, and then the shorter one is 5, and then we have another 5 on our roof. This is the old monster on the roof that's just sitting there, and on the right is where the gas meter used to be. It's since been painted, so you can't tell it was there. And then on the left is a big picture of the compressor on the roof, which is the heat pump compressor. And the right picture is one of the 3 mini split units mounted near the ceiling in our office. And it was just such an improvement in comfort level, and quiet too, because at home we still have air ducts blowing forced air, and when it's blowing, you hear it. It makes noise, all that air going through ducts. But mini splits are ductless, and it's just so quiet and comfortable. Love it. That was a bonus of this, was how comfortable it is and how quiet it is. And those are 4 of the six electric cars that lurk around our office. Not shown are 2 Model 3s that 2 of our agents purchased. And that's the charge point charging station there. 1 car plugged in. And here's what our electric bills looked like. I told you that in November of 2017, we decommissioned our HVAC, and we got this, our asked Excel to remove the meter. And the reason is that the meter alone costs like $40 a month just to have the connection to the gas grid. And so you can see that after that, we started having a minimum cost for the electricity, which is the cost of being connected to the grid. People say, well, how about batteries? Well, the grid is my battery. I don't need to get a battery unless you're worried about power failures. You really don't need a battery. The grid is your battery, and paying $11 a month for the grid for that battery is perfectly fine. So the mini splits are air source heat pumps, which are amazing because even at like 0 degrees Fahrenheit, they can extract heat from the outside air and heat the interior air. And I just find it an amazing technology. And then, of course, it's the opposite in the summertime, where it takes heat out of the interior and puts the heat outside. So the main thing is that gas furnaces create heat. Heat pumps move heat. They don't generate any heat. They simply move it from one place to another, just like your refrigerator compressor moves heat from inside the refrigerator into your room. So my next thing will be, by the way, to get a heat pump water heater. As soon as my 15 to 20-year-old water heater fails at home, I'm going to replace it with a heat pump water heater, which only costs about the same, $1,000 or so, and put it in the same room with a freezer. Because the freezer is going to be moving heat into the room, where the water heater can then efficiently take it out of that room and put it into the water. So I think that's going to be really cool. Ground source heat pump is more efficient than an air source heat pump because, of course, the outside air could go down to 10 below zero. But the Earth is, in this latitude, is about 55 degrees or 52 degrees constant temperature once you get down below, say, about 6 feet. And all you're doing is using enough electricity with a compressor to heat up that 52-degree groundwater, because that's what you do. You circulate glycol or water through the ground, and then you extract the heat out of that 52-degree glycol or water and heat it up with a compressor to heat your interior. That's so much more efficient than heating up 0-degree air outside to make 70-degree air inside, going from 52 to 70. So that's just a much more efficient thing, but of course the installation's a little harder because you have to drill wells to have that glycol or water go through the earth. They can be horizontal wells, however, so if you've got a lot of real estate, like this nice park out here, you could just go down about 10 feet and have them be horizontal, and they'd still get the value of that 52 degrees, but if you're short of space, you can go straight down 200, 300 feet. And the only reason you're going down 300 feet is just to have enough looping to be able to collect that heat from the earth. So anyway.
Jim, before you leave that slide, I just wanted to, we're kind of double teaming on these last 2 slides, but This graphic, you'll see if you take a building tour, this comes from a graphic that's in our basement that Milt put together. But one of the things that Milt likes to point out in showing this slide is that we're all used to refrigeration. We all have a refrigerator in our home, and this is that same technology. The principal difference is that there's a reversing switch so that we're used to a refrigerator providing cooling, but that can be reversed in a ground source or air source heat pump so that in the opposite season, it works in the opposite direction and brings heat in.
Well, the nice thing with ground source is if you've got that 52-degree glycol coming out of the ground, you don't need to do much at all. You just need to blow air over that 52-degree coils. So really all you're paying for in electricity is the pump to bring that, to circulate that up into your heat exchanger where you're going to blow air across it in order to get cold air. So that's even more efficient than the heating cycle. But let me just, in closing, let me just return to my original point, which is that we promote, but we also model it. And it's important to let the world know what you're doing. One of the first things I did was call up the Denver Business Journal, and they came and they did a blog post with a video of us. I wanted other businesses to see this is what businesses can do. And I'm going to my 50th MIT reunion in Boston this 2 months from now, and I got them to feature me and my net zero office as a returning 50-year alumni. Again, not to boast about it, but to show people this is what can be done. You can tread lightly on the earth. You can have zero energy costs. And now I'm 71 years old, and I'm thinking with my net zero home, except for the fact that I burn natural gas, that'll be going away at some point. If I pay off the mortgage, I have electricity on my roof, which not only heats and cools the house, but also powers my car. The cost of living as a senior citizen is going to be more than covered by my Social Security just to pay the property taxes and to feed myself, because my energy needs have gone to practically zero. So, you know, we need to be future thinkers about this. We should all strive to get to that point that I'm getting to, which is where you can have no energy costs for either travel or for a living.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. And we also have some other benefits here of geothermal. But again, we'll take questions when we're finished with the next two speakers. And our next speaker is Ben Valley from Independent Power Systems, IPS. And one of the things I thought was interesting and curious about Ben is here's a guy who has been now in solar and commercial solar for, I think, you said earlier 22 years, but he comes from the agriculture space. So he grew up on a farm, 15 years in construction and farmhand labor. So we don't often get people here in urban Denver, you know, that have that kind of, that bring those kinds of tools to the game. So Ben, let's have you jump in here. There you go. You want to come up here? Yeah. Sure, there you go.
So just next on this thing. Cool. All right. Well, yeah. So thanks for that introduction. And my approach with the owner, Tony Boniface, who's been doing solar and storage for 22 years, has been a very pragmatic approach, just because, like you said, being on a farm, it's something that when we didn't have power that we really needed, it was a big problem. And that's actually one of the places that I first learned about energy technologies. And so my approach as a salesperson through that entire time of being at IPS was always for the client and seeing what they really need, what their situation is. And so over the past 7 years, what I've seen is in sales, often people are used to kind of the self-serving salesperson approach, which is, here's my stuff, here's all the things that I have to offer, this is me, instead of a you approach. And so at IPS, what we do is we find, okay, what is it that you really need? And that's what I'm going to be talking about here is with resiliency and microgrids, sometimes it doesn't actually make sense for you, but it's something that should be considered. And we've been at this asking our clients, not telling them, but asking them, what do you need? What is interesting to you to make your business resilient, to make your building resilient, from not only this idea of resiliency insofar as you have power when the power goes out, when the grid goes down, but also you have resiliency in your finances, in making a highly educated decision, making the best decision for your building for any sort of upgrade. So I have this slide up, obviously showing the scenario of a power outage. And I bring that up for the experience that I've seen out there for our clients where they have a whole community tied to their building. And what they can do in this case is provide power for their whole community in the example of electric vehicles, slow charging. If you think about, for us, the best example that I have is the Boulder floods when there was long-term power outages. In areas where there was batteries in the building, they could actually trickle charge their electric vehicles. And then some of the other things that were closer to home was the ability for any diabetics to bring their medicine and put them into fridges there, because that was a big problem. And just little details like that. But in the context of what's actually possible is bringing in all of these technologies, Bill's technologies, lightly treading. It's actually a comprehensive solution that makes it pencil. I'm not coming up here with any rocket science idea from IPS, having done off-grid for a long time. The way that I've actually seen it pencil is very, very simple. It's just by combining all of us together and looking at the project in that way. And there are new technologies out there that IPS is looking at and that we're actively implementing for commercial buildings that are great and they're advanced. But really, it's just these technologies combined that make it possible. And so my highest recommendation through me coming up here to talk about microgrids and resiliency is just to look at the whole picture. What is it worth to you to have your community able to come and use a resource if and when the power goes out? That's something to look at first and foremost, because if it's not useful, then you shouldn't look at it. And then after that, what are all of the efficiency measures that you can do? Because this process, I know very well that it can be a long process and a hard process for organizations to look at these upgrades. And so it's really useful to look at a lot of them at once and see how you can finance them and get a lot of opinions from all the different contractors. Because the best projects that I've seen out there are ones where they got several bids from several different types of contractors. And then a service that we've provided at IPS is to even take all of those and say, hey, let me see this one, this one, and this one, and why don't we blend all of them together and see what the payback is then? So that's the biggest recommendation that I have in coming up here, is to really look at the whole approach, because I've seen some cases where I come to a building and they've done this and that, but it's like, oh shoot, if you had also came in and considered LEDs, it would have been a game changer, or controls. And I think I may have caught an example that Bill had where with solar, if you were to reduce your building, this is a very detailed example, but I bring it up to prove a point, where if you're to reduce your demand to below 25 kilowatts, all of a sudden it makes your solar worth twice as much, almost 3 times as much in some cases. And so it's something where clearly if I were to look at the proposal afterwards of the solar savings being worth 2 to 3 times as much, that's amazing and totally worth the investment in LEDs. How am I doing on time?
Yeah, why don't you wrap and we'll just go ahead.
Cool, yeah. So this is just a quick example of something that we did recently with Boulder Housing Partners. And it is an example of what I just described, them doing essentially everything combined to be able to make it pencil.
Yeah, and that's a great lead-in for, we're going to bring Bill back to talk a little bit more in detail about control systems to manage demand. And it was nicely described, Ben, that if it works in your situation and you can reduce demand, especially if you can get below 25 kW, then that increases the value of not just solar, but really everything. Save a lot of money. So over to you. There you go. Sorry. It looks like we left a couple out. Sorry about that. Okay. Bill.
Okay, great. Thank you. Ben's correct. If you have a solar system and you get off the SG rate onto the C rate, under 25 rate, because of net metering and because you are credited the retail value of the rate, now you're playing with 10 cent, 12 cent kilowatt hours instead of 3 or 4 cent kilowatt hours like you are on the SG rate. So it makes a huge difference to the value of your solar. And that's a great lead in because I wanted to talk a little bit about demand control and solar. There's some real interesting things that you should know and some misconceptions out there. One of the misconceptions is, hey, I've got solar, I don't need a demand control system. And the answer to that is solar will offset kilowatt hours because of net metering. You're using the grid for storage, which Jim mentioned. But it will not reliably reduce peak demand. And that is because your building doesn't always peak coincident with your solar production. And that's because of nights and cloudy days, snowy days, and yes, it does happen, failure of some solar systems. So when you're talking about solar and the electrical aspects of it, you're talking about bidirectional, okay? And from the utility's point of view, the terms are kilowatt hours delivered. In other words, the utility's selling it to you. And that's called positive flow or forward flow. And kilowatt hours received, which is when the utility's buying it back from you. And so demand is only monitored and charged on kilowatt hours delivered. In other words, when you buy it, demand is measured and billed. When you sell it, there's no credit to you for demand. And that's the key why the SG rate is not as friendly as the C rate or the under 25 kW when you're selling it back to XL.
There's no demand charge for residential, though, right?
Residential, XL does have a residential demand rate. They actually have 2 demand rates. One is the classical demand rate that's been around since 1976, called the RD rate. And now there's a new RD TOU rate, which is the time of use flavor of it, which is actually a pretty darn good rate, except for one thing, but that's a whole different subject. So
That's also a pilot program. That's a pilot,
True.
Small users, yeah.
if you are not all electric, for the most part, you don't want to be on a demand rate residentially, okay? If you have electric heat, electric hot water, then you have enough load to control and make sense financially. But I would not consider, I don't recommend most people because their kilowatt hour use is usually low. It's, 800 to 1200, maybe 1500 kilowatt hours a month. And those homes do much better on the energy only R rate. So, but I'm sorry, I'm digressing. So let's take a look a little bit about some commercial customers. So this is a church here locally, and I was able to capture, is my pointer working here? Yes. This is their load. Their total load of the building is in the purple line. And the kilowatt hours delivered from XL is shown by the blue line. So you can see, I don't want to shine this in your eye, John. So solar system comes online here about 8 o'clock in the morning, and the energy from XL drops to zero. So all of this energy that's being supplied to this load in the building is supplied by their solar system. And then, of course, in the afternoon, kilowatt hours start to taper off of the solar, and the delivered comes back. So this is your perfect solar customer. They have their total load or their peak load. Let's forget this 25 kilowatt line up here, and let's say this is a SG customer, an over 25, just for argument's sake. This is your perfect customer. And if you could do this every day during the month, you'd save a bundle because all of this is being supplied by your solar array. And only when the solar is not functional are you being supplied by XL. Now here's what happens though. In the morning here, we had a meeting or something, some function here, and they had a peak. And this was all supplied by XL because the solar was not on. And of course, the solar started to come on about here, finally got down. Here's a cloud going over for an hour or so. Comes back online enough to supply all their needs. And of course, then it goes to sleep in the afternoon and we're back on XL here. So this is what you're trying to avoid this is what you're trying to avoid having happen, but it does happen. And of course, here's an evening function. Same thing, they're doing pretty well during the day here. Solar's on, clouds come over, so we got some XL energy, but partial solar right in here. All solar, and then it gradually throughout the evening, we're all back on XL. So that's kind of how these things tend to flow back and forth between the grid and the solar. This is a local church here. I worked with them for a while, and when we first started working together, they said, well, we got 100 kW of solar on our roof. And we said, great, they're 150 kW, so let's think we're going to get down to 50 to maybe 75 or so. Well, in looking at this much further, what they really have is 6 systems on their roof of various sizes and various orientations that contribute energy in different amounts during the day. And so the sum of the parts is not equaled by the production. The production's much lower than the sum of the parts because you never get 100% out of that 100 kilowatts of panels. And so this is what they look like. A few years ago, a Sunday morning in July, and we come up here and the demand controller says, okay, I'm going to try to maintain 110 kW, and we got a nice great big water heater here, which we were able to turn off for most of that time and cycle air conditioning the rest of the time. And then as soon as the services are over there, their load drops. And of course, some of this, and I'm sorry I don't have the other portion of the data here that shows how much the solar was contributing. A week later, similar type of situation, did a little bit better, less time of control here. So this is where we were shedding and restoring loads to maintain the demand at 110 kilowatts. But we got them from 150, 160 down to 110 or so. And so at $23 a kW, because they're so far over 25, they're on game A of just incrementally reducing demand for each kW they can reduce for the savings of avoided kW. Now, there's a lot of people that look at electric water heaters and say, "Oh my God, what are you doing with that?" And this is electric water heater. You can usually tell because there's no ductwork and there's a big box on the side. This is actually a huge opportunity because this happens to be 18 kilowatts and 3 6 kW elements that we can control separately. And I alluded to my game of electrical Tetris before, where I take this block of demand. Now I have 3 6 kW blocks of demand that I can turn on and off later in time to avoid that peak demand here. All right, this is my new best friend from a few years ago. How much time do I have? Yeah, just a minute, 20 seconds. Okay, this is called a load duration curve. Load duration curve takes a year's worth of interval data, which is 35,000 and change data points. So in other words, 12 months or let's say 365 days, 24 hours a day, 4 15-minute periods an hour. We end up with 35,000 data points. So this is a church not here locally, in full disclosure. And this is the percentage that they are above a certain KW level. So you can see for the entire year, they are above 15 for just over 2% of the year. Okay? This is huge opportunity. This jumps out at me because of that curve. If their curve came down like this, they would not have the opportunity. But 86 hours or so, they're above 25 kW. And so this is a huge candidate for moving from the SG to the C rate. And this is very easy to do if you can get the interval data from Excel or another utility. Now, as utilities move toward the quote-unquote smart meters, they're called AMI for advanced meter infrastructure. One of the things you get with smart meters is this data. So if you have a smart meter on your building, ask the utility for this data for the last year. And one of these graphs can tell you very, quickly and easily what it looks like. And then I won't even go into this one, but this is 365 days of data all laid over on top of each other to tell how many 15-minute periods, where you are for every 15-minute period. So anyway, that's...
Here you go. Oh, why don't you do this? That's important there.
So what makes a good candidate? Well, if you're an all-electric building, normally it's a home run because you have enough things to control. And you're probably peaking without some sort of control system like this. And what we want to do is have you peak like this. Of course, many suitable loads to control. Most of what we're doing is electric hot water heaters, air conditioning, electric heat, and I've done a lot of 12 kilowatt baptismal heaters. You got to kind of look, but in churches, more often than not, those are the loads you're going to find. Low load factors. This is kind of like saying low miles per gallon electrically, and load factors are calculated based off your bills, but I won't go in. Operational pattern of the building. We look at that and see if it makes sense, because a church with a school or a daycare center is going to be a lot different than a church without. And I think that's probably enough.
Okay, good. Thank you very much. And so we're sort of out of time, but let's take a moment and see if there are any burning questions from the audience. Yes, and Peter's got a microphone there for you.
So this is to Jim. Do you build houses?
No, we sell them.
Oh.
I'm a realtor, residential realtor.
I was going to ask, if you build houses, would you build them the way like you built your office, but never mind.
Of course.
Let's see. I did have a question for Ben. How micro is micro? I mean, so the microgrid's a big thing now with, the trying to recover or restore from, like a sunspot flare or whatever. So in my reading, microgrids anywhere from 100 to 1,000 houses. How big are your microgrids?
So great question. Basically, our definition of a microgrid is really just the ability to operate without the grid at all. It really is depending on what context you're talking about a microgrid, but that's our definition, where it's like a microgrid. Grid is just like
Micro meaning small, right?
energy all the time.
Micro is micro. I mean,
Yeah.
you know what I'm talking about?
Totally. Yeah.
You know, the DOEs, microgrids.
Yeah, well,
Ben-
that's what I mean by the context. Is like
Yeah.
there is the infrastructure that Excel is trying to build where you can have a response without the outside grid. You can have batteries in individual homes.
Right.
We just did a study with them where we installed solar, or we installed batteries into several homes so that they could study how micro the grid could be being useful to them.
I would just augment what Ben said by it really is right sized for the use. So I'll give you a large example. Chicago is doing in the utility in Chicago, Commonwealth Ed, is doing a big project, and their microgrid is campus wide. It's for a subsystem of their, and that's called a microgrid. But a microgrid in a home would obviously be very small, or in a business. Yeah.
So, I mean, okay, so the only way we're going to survive a coronal mass ejection, right, right, if we get direct hit, is that we have thousands of these microgrids. So we're completely divorced from the grid, and we can have small sections of the country at least be resilient enough that will come back within, say, 6 months. Right now, we're down for like 20 years if we get hit with a coronal mass ejection. So
Yeah. Well, let me just say one teeny tiny
Yeah,
thing.
well, I just wanted to make sure if there were any other burning questions, we were almost out of time. So, yeah, one back there. Sorry, Ben.
That's okay.
Okay.
So has the PUC changed after you get down to 25 kW for less than a year? Because when we wrote letters, they would not change their mind. You have to stay below that for a year
That is
before you
correct.
get any benefit, and that's robbery
Yeah.
for churches.
Yeah, I'm one of some of the work I've done with COSIA. This is essentially a pet peeve that I've been one of the champions working on this. I will tell you that we chose, and it'll take a year or two to see this play out. But I was the expert witness for in the rate case with Black Hills. We chose to take this to task with Black Hills as a way of maybe saying, if they do it, then you do it. And we were successful at moving that 25 kW level up to 50 kW. And so in the next rate case with Excel, we will be there to say, hey, you did it for Black Hills, you ought to do it for Excel as well. Were that to happen, this problem that Bill is describing here would sort of be immune to probably 2/3 of all churches instead of 20% of all churches. Yes.
So one thing that Ben didn't mention is vehicle to grid. V2G is the acronym for it. And within 5 years, you'll probably hear a lot about this because at my house, I don't have a battery backup if there's a power failure, but I have at any given time 150 kilowatt hours of storage in my 2 Teslas in the garage. And there will be, in the future, there will be a way for you to, in a power failure, to hook up your electric car to critical
Excellent point.
parts of your
Yeah,
home.
excellent point.
And run it.
The future is in front of us. Yes. Any other burning questions? We probably have time.
I have
for
one
just
more. Have you
Yes.
also, is it allowable to, on the churches that are, let's say, at 35 kW, is it allowable to put a second meter on? Because if you had a second meter on and you have, let's just say,
It's a-
10-ton
Yeah.
ACs, you could solve this problem for churches. Get
Yeah, it's a
permission
cl-
to do
it's a-
that.
It's a clever idea. Bill, you might have a response there.
I've been through that a couple of times, and Excel doesn't want to hear anything about that. And I think their idea is if you have, let me think about the phrasing, something to do with a single organization within the same building structure, you cannot put a second meter on there. Now, to separate that out from like storefronts that each have their own space that are not related, they'll allow that.
Maybe if you have
Yeah,
a school,
needs to
you
be
could
some.
spin it off.
One other thing I'll mention to your question. If you stay below 25 kW for 12 months, they do not automatically move you back. You have
Excellent
to go
point.
ask for that. So,
Yes. Yes. But the other way, it's automatic, by the way. Yes, that is correct. In a year. That is absolutely right. Yes. Yeah, you'll automatically go up to it, but you won't automatically go down. So, thanks so much to our
John.
panel, and
Hey,
we
John.
need to regroup for the next panel here. So, I
John.
appreciate everyone's support. Thank you.
Hey, folks, just one real quick thing to Larry's question. I think it was Larry, were you asking about builders or buildings like that? We work with general contractors and are involved with doing residential properties that are trying to reach net zero as well as passive house styles. So we could certainly help you or someone you know if they're looking to do something like that. So